plus a special bonus short. And The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai.
That movie kind of sucks.
Yes, and other movie quotes.
True.
So far, the weather looks like it's going to cooperate. On the off chance that things suddenly get terrible, the backup weather plan for movie night is in here in this theater at 10 p.m. If that is the case, we will put an announcement on Twitter and we'll have signs and helper monkeys posted by the main pool. And also it'll be really windy and wet. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. here in this room is the final concert. No, don't think about that now. Tomorrow's another day. But tomorrow's concert will feature John Hodgman and Jonathan Coulton. A couple very brief schedule announcements. I've been handed this note and paid enough money to tell you that the Advanced Drinking and Drawing meetup will happen Saturday, February 16th, tomorrow, 11 till 1:30. Take place at the covered area near the main pool in the Solarium Adults Only Pool. When you say in the pool, I hope you mean in the pool. That's with Joel Watson, Lars Souza, and Rob Denblaker. Basically, you buy them drinks and they will draw you things until they're no longer capable of holding a pen. And for a final other schedule announcement, we'd like to bring out Assistant Principal David Reese.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Jonathan. Hi, everybody. So people have been asking if I'm sharpening pencils this year, as I have the past 2 cruises. I'm not. But I thought it would be fun to teach a pencil sharpening workshop where I teach you how to sharpen with a straight blade, the old way. This is the way that your great-grandparents probably sharpened pencils before the advent of the single burr hand crank sharpener, or even the single blade pocket sharpener. So if you're interested in learning at the feet of the master, I was thinking we could do it tomorrow outside by the crazy pool with all the colorful homunculi in it. So why don't we meet there at 11:30? I have 10 box cutters, and
he wants to do this.
but here's the thing. I have no pencils, so bring your own pencils. And I know there are people on board who have pencils, and they're probably friendly, so they'll probably share a pencil with you. So if you're interested, come at 11:30. Even if you don't get your hands on a blade, you'll still learn a lot, because I'll be telling you a lot about the history of pencils and pencil sharpeners and pencil sharpening techniques. Thanks.
David Reese. 10 box cutters and a dream. And I'll turn over the evening to Dr. Smallpenis.
Thank you, Mrs. McLaurin. Our first act this afternoon, I was going to say evening, but that's just wishful thinking. You know him from the fantastic webcomic XKCD. You may also know him from my new favorite thing on the internet, What If? I am just a huge admirer of his work. It's funny, it's nerdy, and it transcends all that and is moving and amazing. And I'm so thrilled to have him here, Randall Munroe.
Hey everyone. So thanks Jonathan, and before I start, a big thank you to Paul and Storm and JoCo and all the helper monkeys and everyone for putting this all together, and especially getting me out here from Boston, which involved a frantic 6 a.m. flight change, and it was and they did a great job of it, and so I really appreciated that. So people are generally, when I do one of these, there are a lot of people who are seeing me in person for the first time. And I think that although intellectually everyone knows I'm not a stick figure, there's still that moment of surprise where I meet someone and they'll like, hi, good to meet you. And then, sort of like, and you're a real person. And you can see they're thinking like, well, of course I didn't think he was a stick figure, but but no, I am not a stick figure, and I also don't wear a hat. I have trouble finding my size. So not all of the things that are in the comic are actually about me. However, I did build a ball pit in my house. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that and how you can do the same thing yourself, some of the problems that I encountered and how to work around that. But first, I wanted to share the results of a few calculations I've done. See, this is my first time on a cruise ship, and my first look at it was when I was doing the schematic diagram of it that you may have seen on the posters and the screens around the ship. Which, by the way, I did not have the nice side view cutaway that is helpfully up there when I was doing it. I had to reconstruct it from the individual deck diagrams, placing them on top of each other in Photoshop, and then stretching them to try to fit, because it turns out they're not quite to scale. If anyone tried to construct a ship just using those diagrams, it would not float. But so I was blown away by, like, just in the very obvious how big it is. It's mind-boggling that something this big can move. And so one of the first things that I started to wonder about and tried to work out is what would it take to make it fly? And the answer, after I got through a bunch of research, was a little under 3,000 extreme heavy lift helicopters, each one with a 1-inch strand of Kevlar cable. They'd have to be arranged in like a layered setup, but far enough apart that the downwash didn't throw them all over the place. Or I then realized a simpler approach is a half-kilometer wide balloon.
Definitely much easier.
Let's see, and then I just started, I figured out the internal volume of the ship, and then the first thing I worked out was, if the ship were filled with meat, it would be 600 billion calories, and sustain everyone on board for about 250 years. And then I realized that the ship is filled with meat. Which led me to my next calculation. Namely, if everyone in this theater and the rest of the sea monkeys and performers were somehow caught in a carnivalesque situation, stranded at sea, with no hope of rescue, we could survive by eating the other passengers for 400 to 500 days. Although we should try to keep that quiet until that actually happens. So I have a blog that Jonathan mentioned, What If, which is where I answer these kinds of hypothetical questions using physics. And I started it. I do cartoons on the internet, but I actually have a physics background. And for a while, I worked at NASA on NASA School. And I worked on robotic navigation, was one of my things. So my job was to make, we had a demo of robot, and it was about the size of R2-D2. It had a nice Omni wheels set up so it could sort of strafe in any direction. And my job was to make it not run into walls, and I spent my day making the robot run into walls. And I worked there for not very long, for the better part of a year, until I either quit or was let go. It depends on who you ask. I was working on a contract basis, and when one of my contracts ran out, they said, we're not going to renew this contract, but we're going to, but we could find you another contract here if you want. at the same time, I had been drawing these comics, and I started to sell stuff online, and I realized I could maybe not get a new contract for a little while and just draw comics for a living, and I've been doing that ever since. And so I wasn't the best employee, since I had just gotten really excited about doing comics right around the time I started working there. And I did not draw any comics while I was at work on the job, but I definitely would spend a lot of time thinking and scribbling down ideas. But the one thing that my best memory from NASA was that at one point, so we had this robot. It was about the size of, like I said, R2-D2 sized, and it had sort of a stalk with a large head on it that had a bunch of cameras. And it was pretty powerful for a demo robot that was supposed to just, zoom around in an office. So one day I got an office chair and a length of Cat5 cable, and I fashioned a lasso. And I got a laptop that was controlling the robot and commanded it to move over to me. And what I had been doing was teaching the robot one of the things I had taught it was a sort of generic wander algorithm. So it would just go and explore a space. And I took the lasso, looped it over the robot's head, wrapped it around my hand, pulled my feet up on the office chair, got the laptop on and then said, wander, and then hung on. And it accelerated out into the, across the room, and I'm swinging along, towed along behind it, out into the hallway, and then down this long corridor of this big office building we worked in, which was generally pretty quiet. And I'm going past the rooms where each person is working, clinging on, we're for an office chair, moving pretty fast. And every time I go around a turn, I'll get swung way out, hang on, go past the office where the people who are paying me to work there are, and then they look out and see that, and I didn't make this connection until later, but it was the next contract I was up for that did not get renewed. But I did, that was, as I passed the office, I was thinking, okay, why am I doing this? Why am I not working? And it occurred to me that I could claim my code was compiling. So, on Tuesday, if were any of you here for the set where John Roderick told his story? So I thought that was great. And if I could get the screen down here, we could. I've got a couple of slides. So what I did is I heard John Roderick tell his story about, and in this story he stole an airplane, and specifically stole his father's airplane and tried to take off. Barely managed. Took off, flew around in Alaska where they were a little bit, landed. Again, barely sticking the landing, and then never flew again. So I started. It was interesting. The model of airplane that John Roderick stole was a Cessna 172, which is this pretty common kind of light aircraft. And it just so happens that I had done a few calculations relating to the Cessna 172. Because what I did is I investigated for an article I wrote how this Cessna would fly on atmospheres other than Earth's. So, I'd like to present what would have happened to John Roderick had he stolen that plane on the 32 largest solar system bodies and tried to take off. Now, for starters, the problem of actually running an internal combustion engine on other planets is something we have to get out of the way first, because it needs oxygen to run. It needs to burn it with the fuel. So we'd have to run it off of batteries of some kind, which would take filling up the fuel tank with lithium-ion batteries and probably last it for about 10 minutes. But as it turns out, it won't be able to run that long anyway, in any of these cases. So I just will go planet by planet here. So he steals a plane and is dropped into the atmosphere of Jupiter. What happens is he sinks downward. The plane can't get any lift. Descends, and Jupiter doesn't actually have a surface. The atmosphere keeps getting thicker until it smoothly transitions to a liquid. And he would continue to descend further and further. The pressure would pick up and up, and eventually he would be crushed into some kind of a shapeless mass. Saturn, about the same story. The airplane can keep a slightly higher glide angle, but it still is not able to keep itself up against the force of gravity there. And Roderick is a shapeless mass once again. Uranus? Neptune? Now, Venus is an interesting case because Venus has about the same surface gravity as Earth, but the atmosphere is some 60 or 70 times denser. It's it's also about 500 degrees. I think that's Celsius, but at that point, it doesn't really matter. So he gets into his father's plane. We're not sure what his father was doing there or how he managed to survive on the surface to get into the plane, but we say he gets in, and at 400 degrees, the aluminum frame of the plane does not actually melt, but everything flammable catches fire. On Mars, it is possible to fly on Mars, and down the hall from where I was working at NASA, there was a project. This was at Langley Research Center in Virginia, but there was a project to build a rocket-powered plane that would fly around on Mars. And the problem is that to fly on Mars, because the atmosphere is so thin, you need to be traveling at about 80 or 90% of the speed of sound, just to get enough lift to take off. And a Cessna cannot fly at Mach 0.9, it turns out. So even if the Cessna were in the air somehow, it would immediately plummet toward the ground. If John Roderick jumps into the plane on the ground, turns it on, battery-powered engine, propeller spins and spins and spins and spins, there's not enough air to get any traction, the plane does not roll forward, and Roderick dies on the ground. Now, we're through the first half dozen or so of the 32 largest solar system bodies. Now, Ganymede, it's one of the outer moons. It has no atmosphere, so the plane just sits there slowly cooling. Titan is actually the friendliest planet to flight, even friendlier than Earth. The atmosphere is 4 or 5 times thicker than ours, the surface pressure is a little higher than ours, and the gravity is much lower than ours. So one thing that I worked out is, with an atmosphere that thick and with gravity that low, if you got a good hang glider, like a sport glider, and a large, oversized set of swim flippers, by paddling, you could actually keep yourself in the air and fly all over the place on Titan. And I've seen some other people who've calculated out that it would be possible to strap wings to your arms and stay aloft in the air there, which is pretty cool. Unfortunately, the one catch is that the surface temperature at Titan is a little over 70, which is not Celsius or Fahrenheit, but Kelvin. A Cessna flying around on Titan, by my calculations, would lose heat at a few degrees a minute, so it would probably the inside of the cabin. So he would probably last maybe 5, 10, 15 minutes before everything shuts down. Mercury, a plane dropped on Mercury does not fly. Callisto, same story. Io, with the sulfur volcanoes, same, no atmosphere. The moon, also no atmosphere. And at this point, John Roderick is wondering, do we have to do all 32? And the answer is yes. Triton dies on the ground. Eris, one of the newly discovered dwarf planets, dies on the ground. Pluto, a dwarf planet. Titania, another of the outer moons, dies on the ground. Rhea, there are a lot of these outer moons, as Roderick is discovering, dies on the ground. Oberon, dies on the ground. Haumea, dies on the ground. They keep discovering new moons. We can expand this further if we want. Iapetus. Snow White, which is actually extremely red. It's one of the most poorly, that's a nickname given to it by the astronomers when they thought it was bright colored, but it turns out to be one of the darker moons in the solar system. Doesn't help, dies on the ground. Pluto's moon dies on the ground. Umbriel dies on the ground. Ariel dies on the ground. This one hasn't been given a name yet, but it doesn't have an atmosphere. Tethys. Sedna, recently discovered dwarf planet out past Pluto. And Ceres was formerly, like Pluto, was once thought to be a planet, but is now considered one of the dwarf planets in the asteroid belt. No atmosphere. And of course the Sun, which is the largest of the 32 largest solar system bodies. And I did run through the calculations here. And it turns out that it's not surprising at all. The plane is incinerated in under a second, and then it's vaporized, and then that vapor is turned to plasma. And Earth, where we already heard the story, which is that Roderick successfully steals the plane, takes off, lands, grows up, attends this cruise, and that is the tale of the 32 John Rodericks. So one of the problems with doing a blog like this with the readership that I have, which no matter what the subject is, there are dozens of people reading my comic and then my blog who know a lot more about the subject than me. So one of the early the first post that I did for What If was, what would happen if you tried to hit a baseball pitched at 90% of the speed of light? And I spent an entire day going through the calculations, figuring out that the ball collides with the atoms in the atmosphere ahead of it and moves toward the batter, surrounded by an expanding shell of high-energy X-rays and fusion products and so on, which then hits the batter, picks him up, and disintegrates him, of course, and the bat, and the catcher, and the backstop, and then continues to gouge out this ever-widening trench of debris until it finally creates a crater some hundreds of meters behind the backstop and expands into a thermonuclear style explosion that leaves a crater, wipes out any nearby city, and just completely devastates the region. And then the last thing I did when I was working this out was I looked up the rules of baseball to figure out, in this circumstance, that by my best reading, and I'm not a sports person, that in that circumstance the batter is considered hit by pitch. And is eligible to take first base, should it be located. But when I finished this, I got I posted this and I was pretty proud of it. And then I got an email and I got a bunch of emails and people were really interested and they wanted to discuss the physics. And then I got one email from someone who said, "Hey, I work at the MIT High Energy Physics Lab, and your article got passed around and we liked it, and so I ran some simulations for you." And there are a few effects you didn't, there were a few things that corrections you wanted to offer. And, some interesting effects. It turns out that if the ball is moving at that speed, it's high enough to overcome the Coulomb barrier, which means that when it hits the molecules of the atmosphere, they can fuse. What I didn't figure out is it's actually moving too fast, goes over the other side, and it will pass right through the air molecules, so it'll get heated uniformly, which means that the gouge, the effect is basically the same. It doesn't really make a difference to the batter, the crater, or to the rules of baseball. But I'm gonna anything I write like this, I'll get these. I'm hoping if I ever publish a revision of this article, I can get to include all of the cool stuff people have sent me. But the weirdest place that this ever came up was probably, so a little while ago I did a comic, early on in the days of XKCD, I did a comic about poking fun at Richard Stallman, who's this sort of notorious character. I mean, he's kind of an outsized personality, and he's a crusader for free software. He's not, as it turns out, a crusader for open source software. There's a violent terminological dispute in that community, he hates the term open source. So I drew a comic that had him fighting off Microsoft's assassins with the swords that he sleeps with under his bed, and so just that I thought was having fun, and no one minded that my caricature of Stallman. The problem was I had him as he faces off the assassins, raising his swords into the air. Part of his the tirade is open source will carry on.
Please.
So I post the comic. It gets auto-posted at midnight, and I wake up. I had gone to sleep already by that point. But for some reason, I woke up like I needed to use the bathroom or something, and because I'm one of those people, I open my computer as I'm coming back to bed and see that I have 2 or 3 dozen emails, and it's 12:30. All of them saying Richard Stallman would never use the term open source. He hates that term. So the problem was I had titled the comic Open Source. So what I sort of thought about it for a little while, and I realized that I had the assassins say free software, and then Stallman says open source. So I went and I try not to edit the comics after they've gone up, but I could tell by the flood of email that I needed to stop this. So I was like, okay, I'll switch it. I'll have the assassins say open source, and I'll have Stallman say free software. So they'll be using the term he hates, and he'll be, correcting him in his response. And I figured so it still has the term open source in there, and the title is open source, but I don't have Stallman saying open source, so probably, even on the internet, no one's going to be pedantic enough to be annoyed at the proximity. And my readers are, they're really nice, and I didn't get it. I got So I waited the rest of the day, and I didn't get anything else about it. No one complained about the word open source. And then like a day later, I did get one email by someone who was saying that the term is so hated in that community that its proximity to Stallman was a problem, and that I needed to change the title and the metadata about the comic to say free software throughout. Maybe have some explanatory text. And I'm sort of rolling my eyes, and I get to the bottom of the email, and it's signed Richard Stallman. But he was really nice about it. We exchanged some emails, and I've tried to be better about that in the future. So one thing that I've seen and enjoyed on this cruise is there's been this trend this year, and I don't know if this was there last year since it's my first time, but toward temperance pledges. And so people are taking these Wi-Fi temperance pledges, which I'm not one of those people. Elevator temperance pledges, and so on, and they're vowing not to do these things. But what I was really happy to see a post by one of the passengers, David, I think, who saying that he was taking a temperance pledge. Vowing not to do anything, vowing not to limit the things that he was going to do on the trip by arbitrary rules, because he's an adult and he can make his own decisions about what's going to make his cruise nice and happy. Which I wholeheartedly approve of, but unfortunately I had already taken a temperance pledge not to take any self-referential temperance pledges, which would lead to a paradox. And then I took a pledge to just stop being so damn meta about everything. And incidentally, stop being so damn meta about everything is my Paul and Storm cover band. So, I drew a comic which was about building a ball pit in your house. Like putting up a baby gate and then just filling the apartment or the house with playpen balls about yay deep. And when I drew the comic, I had not actually done this. I just thought that's a really cool idea, and one of the great things about doing comics is that you can draw great ideas and then see them there, and then you don't have to do all the extra work of like building it. So I drew this comic, and I had thought about this over the years. Like, it'd be kind of cool to have a ball pit in your house, and you could just like hide under it and sneak around. But I was thinking, like, there are obvious problems. Like, for starters, hygiene. I figured that's not going to work. You're going to drop food. It just seemed, how would you clean it? So I just did a comic about it instead, avoiding all of the practical problems. And I get an email. And it's from Richard. No, it's from this guy in Boston who says, "Hey, I saw your comic and it was a great idea, so I built one." And he included photos. He had put it up on his blog. He was like, he had a party in it, and he had fenced off an area under. He had a lofted bed, and so he fenced off a region under it, and filled it up about yay deep, and had some parties. And I was like, this is actually practical. I didn't realize. So I emailed him back. He's like, "Where did you get them?" And he says that one thing you had to do is you had to get the crush-proof kind, because with adults jumping into a ball pit, they tend to get flattened a lot if you don't have those. So I talked to him a little bit, and he says, "Yeah, I got them from this great company in Florida called Tinker Tots, which sells playpen balls." So I go onto the Tinker Tots website, and they sell, and I buy a couple of batches of their crush-proof playpen balls. They get shipped to my house. It turns out there's no way to compress playpen balls for shipping. They just ship the size they are. So I get a couple of these big boxes, and we cordon off an area and block it with some furniture and put up a barrier and fill it up, and we have a ball pit in our house. And we invite a bunch of people over, and they all jump in, and everyone is hanging out in it, and everyone says it's lots of fun, but then like after a few minutes of jumping in, it's sort of the size of a hot tub basically, and after a few minutes of like lounging around in it, everyone comes up with the same complaint, which is it's really too small. So that's that was in the middle of the first year that I had been doing XKCD like as a full-fledged business. I moved to Boston, we had the sysadmin for the website and I had gotten an apartment together and we had an honest-to-God business, filed, incorporated, all that stuff. And so at the end of the year, we get our first end-of-year profit, which is kind of cool. And so we're sitting around with this like extra little batch of money since people had bought a bunch of more shirts for Christmas than we expected, which I really appreciate, thank you. And we were deciding, okay, what should we do with this? We could put, save it, buy a nice high-end bicycle to get around Boston, get a nice couch for the living room. So there we are back on the Tinker Tots website. And the thing is, they sell these flavin balls in batches. You can get them in batches of 50 or 100, or if you want to get a bulk order, you can get them a batch of 500 of them. And it turns out we did some calculations, and it takes more than it takes a lot of flavin balls to fill an area, like more than you would probably estimate. So we did some calculations, and then we go onto the site, and in ordering, they have the maximum size for each batch is 500. So we order 10,000. Costs about as much as a nice couch. And then we get, so I placed this order at about 5 p.m. And at 6:30 p.m. I get a phone call. I answer, and it's this nice lady who says, "Hi, this is Lillian from Tinker Tots. Did you just place an extremely large order for playpen balls?" And I said, yeah, I did. Is that a problem? Can you? And then she was like, no problem. That is awesome. We are very happy to have your business. Because I had clearly just like ordered more than they sold in the rest of the year or something. And she said it's not a problem at all. And then the other thing I thought is it the shipping? Because I noticed their shipping calculator didn't give me a shipping price. It didn't, and it turned out it had just couldn't handle an order of that size. And she said, okay, so we do need to figure out shipping. We need to get a separate payment for you for shipping. We can cover, the thing is, we have to rent a truck for this. Because, again, there is no way to compress playpen balls for shipment. But they're like, we'll take half the cost. It didn't turn out to be too big a problem. And about 4 or 5 days later, this truck pulls up in front of my apartment, and a guy unloads a big 2.5 by 2.5 by 2 foot box, carries it in, puts it in our front hall, goes back out, comes back in with another one, goes back out. And I quickly realized the front hall is filling up and the guy is showing no signs of stopping. So we start hurriedly carrying them up the stairs, coming back down. He's brought more of them. We bring them up, and he ends up bringing in the 20 or so boxes that it took. We open them all up, and we pour them. We had actually, since we knew they were arriving that day, we built a structure to cordon off half of the room. And it turns out it has to be pretty strong, so we had to sink some bolts into the wall and to anchor this wall that would hold them in. And then we bring up all the boxes and one by one pour them in. We have a couch in the middle. We thought that might be good. And it starts filling up and up and up and up to about here, filling most of the living room. Now, so you know how there are some things that they seem like a good idea when you have them, but then it's sort of like having someone play the violin at your dinner, where it seems like it's going to be really cool, and then you have it, and then at first it's like, this is awesome, and then you're like, okay, there's this guy here who I've gotten kind of tired of, and I would really like to just have a conversation or something, but it's kind of awkward. Do we look at him? And so it turns out to sort of not be as fun and kind of a letdown in practice. So this, it turns out, is not one of those things. This was awesome. what we did, the next thing we did is we built a rack mounted along the ceiling. We couldn't drill into the ceiling. It's old Boston plaster that would come apart. So we had a set of rails coming from one wall to the other, and we hung a projector and had it project onto the opposite wall. And then on the inner wall of the ball pit, we put holders to hold all the game console controllers. And if you've never lounged around in a 3-foot deep, a 10,000 ball pit, let me explain what it's like. It's actually, as you sink deeper into them, the McDonald's things, which I only vaguely remember, I haven't been since I was 3, 4, or 5 or whatever. They're not that deep, so you pretty much just, as you move around, it jostles the balls around. They're very lightweight. They don't resist you. But the deeper you get, the more friction there is, and the more weight there is compressing them together, and the harder it is to get them to move. So there's a point, like a stasis point, about 2 feet down in a ball pit, maybe 1.5 feet, where a person's weight isn't enough to push the balls aside, and you just sink into it sort of to around that point, and then you just settle. Your arms will settle up higher, and it's sort of like a form-fitting chair. It supports your whole body, and you can just lounge and watch a movie, and or play a video game. And the problem is that you settle in and you sort of stop, but every time there's a little bit of a jostling motion, you sink a little bit further. So one place that this was a particularly big problem was that often we would there would be a couple of us hang out in the living room in the ball pit, and we'd have a laptop open or something, and so I would have my laptop open, and if you turn away to watch, it's projecting something onto the screen or whatever, and it'll just it'll tip up a little bit, sort of like in a Titanic type motion, and then if you move or shuffle or just jostle as you're watching, it'll start to slide sideways down. And so I look away for a very short time, look back, and my laptop is gone. So we dive around, I'm where, can't find it, and then I realize that I get out of the laptop and I go over to my roommate and get her the laptop, which is on the wireless, SSH to my laptop. All right. Logged in, awesome. Let's see, and then I have to remember, and I'm thinking, okay, I can't remember a command line music player, so just cat/dev/urandom /dev/dsp, which sends the output of the random number generator directly to the speakers, and there is a blast of static from the middle of the ball pit. And I jump in and follow it straight to the missing laptop. And we actually did a really good job. We had a strict set of rules about what you could bring into the ball pit. The nightmare was we didn't want to have a fluid, some kind of a spill to clean up, because that would require pulling everyone out. So one of the first things people would ask is so how do you clean it? And the way I thought about it was I was thinking if you don't get it messy, I guess it's sort of like a couch. You sit on a couch, but you don't clean a couch, right? And then I realized, am I supposed to be cleaning my couch? I haven't been cleaning my couch. But we had the ball pit in that apartment for 3 or 4 years, and it was fine. And we had very strict rules about no eating, no bringing food in. You could only have drinks if they were in spill-proof containers, and the only spill-proof containers we could find were those little brightly colored containers, which I guess sort of fit with the whole vibe, but and no leaving fluids in the ball pit that you brought in with you, and because the ball pit that my friend built ended up turning into his roommate. She sort of took it over, and it turned into sort of the lesbian hookup ball pit, because every time she brought a date home, but the ball pit was a big hit, and one of the things was that we would have parties, and people would come in, and we'd put a movie on the projector on the opposite wall, and it, like I said, it's really surprisingly comfortable. It just sort of supports you, and you fall asleep. So if you remember what I said about the laptop and how it was synced slowly, it turns out that a person in the ball pit, over the course of a movie, will also sink slowly if they don't move a little bit now and then to like bring themselves back up, bring their buoyancy, and push them back up to the surface. So frequently, we had people fall asleep in the ball pit and then just disappear. Which sort of led to this problem that I never knew how many people were in my apartment at any given time. And the one thing that I did manage to figure out, so what I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, the way the ball pit supports you, everywhere you are, it's sort of, you have no, like, there's no, you don't see anything. It's like a sensory deprivation chamber kind of. And if you open your eyes, you can breathe fine. There's the balls that they fill up about. And by the way, for the 4 years that I had the ball pits, the incessant balls puns, you'd think they would have like slacked off, but it was just a steady stream the whole time. So you can just make those jokes. But I did had a lot of balls. But the thing that I found, I was thinking, okay, so falling asleep in the ball pit. I think the first person to fall asleep in the ball pit was a fellow webcomic person, JoCo, who does A Softer World. I think he crashed at our place one night, and like he put an inflatable mattress on the ball pit and then ended up just rolling off. And it's great for supporting a mattress, kind of like a waterbed or something, but if you start to tip, slide off, and then the Titanic thing again. So I was thinking, waking up at the bottom of a ball pit has to be like about the most disorienting experience imaginable. And so, but the first time I fell asleep in a ball pit, it drift off, sink down toward the bottom. I think it was a late night movie and the sun rose, and I opened my eyes, and it turns out that waking up at the bottom of a ball pit is actually just about the least disorienting experience possible, because there is absolutely nothing that you could mistake it for. So I woke up, I see bright colors, just surrounding, can't focus, and in a split second, I fell asleep at the bottom of a ball pit. I don't remember what day it is, where I am, or what that was like. But what I did find, at one point we cordoned off half of the ball pit. And this is a thing that I think would be interesting to explore further. We didn't have the balls to do it ourselves, but we divided it about in half. And it was about 3 feet deep before. So dividing it in half, we had to sort of jury-rig a structure and put it all in one half. So it was about 6 feet deep. And then got up on top of like some piece of furniture, like up against nice high ceilings in those old Boston apartments, and jump in. And it turns out that there is a depth limit, because there's a certain distance you'll sink, but if you like propel yourself forward swimming, sort of a breaststroke seems to be the ideal. You can go a little ways deeper, and it seems like about 4.5 feet is the point where you can't move at all, and like you push yourself in, and then you can't move, and then you can't get back out. And then they have to open up the gate and let you out. But I was thinking it would be really interesting to try to get an ever deeper ball pit and see like if you could build some kind of submersible, like a chamber that's weighted to sink down further, tunnel systems. So this led me to my last calculation of the night, which is that I was happy to see they'd announced the JoCo Cruise Crazy 4. And it's on the sister ship of the Freedom of the Seas that is almost exactly the same dimensions that I had already calculated everything out for. So, just so you all know, for $400 million and 2 billion playpen balls, we could fill this ship to the top. Thank you.